Today, guys, I'm making a couple cutting boards. Now, I've made a lot of cutting boards over the years, but I've never made end grain cutting boards, and these are end grain cutting boards. Very interesting, a different beast altogether, and I learned a lot through the process, and I want to share that with you. So let's get started. So I've got some premium walnut here, some African patchouli, and some ash. And my hope is to make two cutting boards out of this. Here is where I made my first miscalculation. You know what it is? I'll tell you later. Now, with any small shop, you have to make trade-offs. And for me, one is a joiner. I had one once, but I wanted other tools, like an edge sander and a drum sander. So I created this, quote, shooting board, if you will, to plane one edge. I usually make two passes, and it works pretty good. Wanted the ash and patchouli much thinner, so I ripped it on my bandsaw, ran it through the planer to flatten it out. I like to rip on a line versus using a jig to maintain thickness, just more comfortable with it. Now I had to cut a splice off the piece of my cubes of walnut to insert a strip of ash in the first pass. I kept the pair together so that I would not add additional pattern complexity to the design. If I mixed the strips, I was afraid that I would maybe add a little bit more variation, and I really didn't want to do that. Some people may like it, but for my board design, I didn't want to do it. I chose to use Title Bond 3 wood glue here. It really gives me longer assembly time, and with these glue ups, I wanted that. Now during the glue up here, I used ash strips that are just a little bit wider than the walnut. Most people would consider that not a problem, but it really is. When I clamped the ends to make sure that the board was flat, it provides too much play for their boards to be uneven, which actually happened in my case with gluing up one of those strips. Cost me about an inch of width on my design. Wasn't really happy about that. I also wrapped saran wrap around the ends of some scrap wood when I used to clamp the ends of the cutting boards. Really prevents them from sticking when gluing the boards together. I have to say, it works great. I think I use a lot of clamps, but I certainly appreciate the fact that I've got so many. And more clamps creates a stronger bond, which I really like. Now, whether I'm working on a cutting board or a jewelry box, I still like to have a strong bond. And that reminds me, I just released a video last month building a jewelry box with all glue, no hardware. Pretty interesting. It's an intriguing piece. You might want to check it out. I always try to scrape off the excess glue before I start planing the board. And I own a glue scraper, but I really don't like it that much. I found that a chisel works better for me. Do you like using a hand scraper? I would be interested in knowing. As I ran them through my planer, you'll notice that I numbered each piece to make sure I get it glued together properly so that I get the pattern that I'm looking for. Now I can use my crosscut set to cut the final strip. And here's where I set the thickness of the overall board. I decided upon an inch and a half for the thickness, and if I could have calculated the number of 1.5 inch strips and the kerf of the cut, I could at the very beginning of the process made a much more accurate decision of exactly how long I wanted the board to be. Overall, it was just fine, but I could have done a better job calculating it before. Now, when I get down to the end of the board, I prefer to use my table saw fence instead of my crosscut sled. It gives me a little more length on the board, and I just feel like I have better control when I cut those smaller pieces. Now I can mix and match pieces to make the most interesting design based on the wood colors and the grain direction and glue it together. I used generous amounts of glue, but I really wanted to make sure everything was flat and straight. This will also save me a lot in the sanding process and trimming the sides. Again, an opportunity to prevent waste as you build these boards. The good thing is I always have an additional backup of glue, as I did run out once on this project. Now with end grain cutting boards, it requires a lot more sanding as the board fibers on the ends are much tougher than the side grain. It took me a long time with 80 grit sandpaper to get both of my boards where I wanted them before the final sanding. A final edge trim and a little edge detail, and I was ready for the final sanding on this pattern board. It was on to the second board, a much easier process and a repeat of really what I did with the pattern board. I still learn through this build process. End grain cutting boards are not really that much different, but there are a few specific considerations to make along the way. I'm sure I'll build more of these in my future, but I think my favorite cutting boards builds are probably the ones where I put some curve into them. And maybe someday in the future, if I get a CNC, I'll actually try to make some very interesting 2 or 3 colored pattern boards. Similar to the previous board, I ran it through the planer after glue up, and then I cut it into strips. Again, about 1.5 inches thick. With this board, I think I have more of an opportunity to mix the pattern as it's all pure walnut and brings out the true variations in the wood. You can really see the difference from one piece to another. I decided to border the piece in ash just to frame the simplicity of the premium walnut inside. Then I added a walnut trim around the outside from leftover scraps that I had from projects. I decided to make these pieces a little bit thinner as not to take away from the creation of the pattern within the ash boundaries. Then I was ready for sanding. Okay, I'm finished with my sanding on the drum sander, and of course it puts a few little lines in the wood when it does that. So I had 80 grit on there. I'm going to use 80 grit and try to get some of the lines out. And then I'll work my way down to 120 grit, 150, and 220. Now, when you're using premium quality wood, and this is premium walnut, it's not cheap. So one of the things you want to do is try to minimize how much scrap wood you have. And this is the scrap that I ended up with after building these 2 different designs. This piece right here is actually a mistake in glue up that I couldn't fix afterwards. And so I lost a little bit of width. I would have got another inch out of this. That's my fault. And the rest of this is just excess wood. It's maybe something I can use in the future for some other small project, but otherwise it's just scrap. Well, this is always the best part, which is having the opportunity to be able to put some oil on a beautiful piece of wood, and the color's going to come out amazingly, and the end grain makes it so interesting. Look at that. Isn't that absolutely beautiful? This brings out some interesting color and patterns in the wood. And this particular board, it's just, look at that. Wow, it's just soaking up the oil. I can't believe that. I'm going to put 3 coats of oil on this because it will soak it up. But wow, I didn't expect that. Just beautiful. Well, I want to thank you for watching today's video. I had a lot of fun building these end grain cutting boards. 2 kind of totally different styles. I really like the way they came out. This is premium walnut, which is kind of the foundation for this, and some African wood kind of created a very interesting pattern in this other cutting board. These boards will be available for sale on my website. They'll ship for free anywhere in the continental US. If you're interested, go take a look. And I'm not asking for a ton of money for these. I'm just trying to cover the cost of the wood and the shipping so that I can go buy more wood, do more projects, and make more videos. So if you're interested, take a look. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and it'd be great if you liked my video, and if you're interested, please subscribe. This is Dave with Level Up Woodworking, and I'll see you next time.